Hello and welcome back to Season 6 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR where this year we're on a mission to share inspiring stories, tips and tricks to help you put customers at the heart of business decisions. To help me do that, today I'm delighted to have Nick Rich here. Nick, welcome to the show. To kick us off, tell me a bit about yourself and the client-side career that you've had.
Well, firstly, Paul, thank you very much for giving me the time and the opportunity to come and talk to you here. Okay, just to give a little bit of context, because most people I won't have met before. I have a 25 plus year in career in insights. So I've done both sides of the fence. For 15 to 20 years, I've been on the client side. So that was, my first role was global research manager at Nokia. I might add, in the glory days, before it's the greatest case study of wrong decision making. And then I went back to TNS, what is now Kantar. But in that time, since that time, I've been the global leader of insights and analytics at Intercontinental Hotels Group in the UK, and then more recently at Carlsberg Breweries in their HQ in Denmark. Yep. But now I find myself back in the UK, having done a little bit of international commuting, and just started my own business, or co-started my own business called Growth Constructors.
Okay, so apart from the international commuting, tell me a bit about the challenges, the main sort of challenges that you faced in those roles at client side.
So we're going to get straight into the meat and the heart of this. I always like to temper, any challenges have to be tempered by positives and successes, right? And I think as an insights industry, we're very good at talking up the good stuff, the places we've had successes.
Yes, we are.
What I'm mostly pleased about this conversation is we are going to address some of the challenges, and I think dig into those because I think they cannot be ignored. But let me give you an example. I mean, the classic things that people in insights talk about, our ability to have impact, our ability to get investment and funding, our ability to get at the right tables. Those are all challenges that we've been talking about for many years, and my experience in client side was no different. We absolutely had those. It was a constant day-to-day challenge to try and solve for those problems. But I also think, some of the challenges are not necessarily insights, but we have to bear the consequences of that. Mm-hmm. So, to give examples, I've put commercial functions and their systematized bad habits. Mm-hmm. We also have bad habits in insights. And what I mean by that is the general cycle of working that goes on year to year. Yeah. The planning, then the execution, and then the results, understanding and sharing. And sometimes I always felt there's a challenge. We could do some of those stages better. Yeah. And insights is culpable. If you go back to planning, are we actually really guiding the business on where growth opportunities lie? Are we really guiding the business clearly and succinctly on what consumers really need? And I often think some of the barriers and challenges to us doing that successfully are, one, down to us, but two, down to the kind of habitual template filling. Yeah. The cycle of process. Yeah. Process over creativity in some cases, where there's problems and particularly in big businesses, you hope a process will solve for that. Sometimes you need to break out of that process and be creative. So there's always a challenge I felt that insights was having to deal with because kind of servicing that need.
But it's interesting you say that when you focus on the process. Did you ever sort of feel that you were going almost from brief through to execution, through to report, and then cycle starts again, that it's almost a treadmill of project to project? Or is that unfair?
You do. And I love process. Nobody, as Donald Trump was saying, nobody loves process more than me. Because actually sometimes it does give you structure. But when you have a business challenge, sometimes the processes are inadequate. Yeah. And I talked about habitual kind of bad behaviors. One of the processes we go through as an insights team, particularly on the client side, is 1, 3, and 5 year planning. You always start that process. And in fact, it's the same when things aren't working well and there's a big challenge and the CEO gets McKinsey or BCG. What's the first thing they do? They go to the insights team and say, let's go through everything you have. And we go through this process of synthesis, distillation, and hand it off into a template. Yeah. And for many insights teams, that's where your job stops. Yes. And we do that once, for 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year planning, or when the big guys come in. Why are we not doing that permanently? Why is that not a permanent part of our job? And that would get us out of that, wait till the brief comes in, execute, deliver. Wait till the brief comes in, execute, deliver. If we made that actually a central part of our job, which is something I made mistakes on and wish I had done better.
Yeah.
But if we made that a permanent part of our job, really looking at where value can be created as well as just delivering knowledge, that puts insights in a very, very different position.
Yeah.
So going back to your question, what were the challenges? It was us facilitating the habitual bad habits of some of the processes, some of the cycles of kind of ineffective knowledge gathering and dissemination. So I wish we'd done those better.
Yeah, the dissemination, let's pick up on that, because there's something that I talk about quite a lot recently. I think you probably heard me talk about it at Quirks recently as well, which is that when we've sort of looked at it quite heavily in the last 20, 30 years as a sector, in marketing generally, we're almost guilty of over-focusing on the customer, which sounds like a weird thing for me to say, but let me just put that in context. When we looked at it, there's twice as much or 3 times as much research and interest in how consumers make decisions rather than how businesses make decisions. And I wonder in there whether if we focus so much on understanding the customer and how they make decisions, are we missing something in understanding how businesses make decisions? And is that sort of linked to your point about knowledge and dissemination?
Let me just ask you a quick question on, so 20 to 30% or times, we are talking more about consumers than we're talking about how the business makes decisions. So how consumers make their choices. What kind of led you to that conclusion? Was it just a repeated observation, or?
It was an observation, yes. But when we looked in sort of Google Scholar and things like that, just looked across academic research, looked across commercial research on Google Trends and things like that. And there's more interest in how consumer decisions are made than there is in how organizations make decisions.
Yeah.
So it's more there's just more written, more understanding out there about how consumers do things. So we know a lot about that, the art and science of how consumers make decisions. And I often wonder, going back to your dissemination point, that if we don't understand the organisation part of that, we just pass it off.
Yes.
Does it actually get used? Does it get impact?
So the reason I asked where's that come from is because I think some of us arrived at similar observations. This idea of how are we having impact and whether there's still a gap. Now, there's a couple of things I can go into, actually come armed with some stats here, which are kind of indicative of where our industry and our profession is. And I'm not casting everybody with the same brush here. You have good, you have average, and you have bad or struggling, right? We all flip between all those all the time. So this is not I'm not casting the insights to, function and industry into all this. As suffering and not getting it right. But my observation at Quirks when I came to see you talk was that we aren't talking enough about this topic. And actually one of the things I did following Quirks, and this is no reflection on Quirks, it's talking about all conferences, is I went through, very sadly, the weekend following, I went through every agenda I could find from the flagship conferences from 2022 to 2025. And I'm still adding to the data. It's a really sad thing to do because my hypothesis was, is the industry talking about the right things? And I was hypothesizing that it wasn't.
Okay.
And what I did, I went through those 31, I think, and counting flagship conferences and coded up all the agenda items, all the sessions. So that's 1,720 sessions. I'm really weird like that. And what I found was that, to give this context, we have the client-side results coming out, which I can talk a little bit further. Yes. The client-side results are coming out, and it says the 3 biggest things are C-suite respect, engagement with senior leadership, so recognizing insights is important, and greater investment for insights. Yep. If those are the 3 things that client-side insight professionals are citing as the biggest challenge and something needing to be fixed, I want to know, are the flagship conferences, as a representative view of what the industry thinks is important or contributors think is important, are they talking about those 3 things? And so I totted up those 1,700 sessions, and I mean, I've got the stats, which I'm happy to have FlexMR flash up, but about a 16th, I would say, 6% is actually talking about impact.
Okay, wow.
The rest is talking about external impact, which is great. So impact on consumers, engagement, CX.
Yes.
Is also talking about methods, collection,
process,
analysis. But 6% of all those sessions was actually focused on impact.
Okay.
And barely 1%, maybe even 0.5% was focused on C-suite and senior leadership.
Wow, okay.
So I'm not saying the conference organisers are getting it wrong or the contributors are getting it wrong, but there is a gap.
But we as an industry...
There is a gap.
Almost, yeah.
So we should talk about that, because if there's a gap and we're not talking about the right things, we should talk about that. And we should talk about it beyond things like democratization of insights, knowledge management platforms, storytelling.
Yes.
Because if the gap still exists, those things are vital, but they are not solving for the problem.
With that in itself is quite an interesting point, because I went through a phase of talking about dissemination of data quite a lot and democratization of data a lot. You know, FlexMR have a platform. Yeah. So obviously I've got a key sort of investment in that.
Yeah.
But when I stopped and thought about it after reflecting on that point about not enough focus on organizational decision making, I realized that what democratization of data is doing is almost just passing off that abrogating responsibility of worrying about that to others. It's almost exactly what I've been saying, which is if we democratize data, we're almost saying, fine, that's not my job. It's someone else's job to use that data. And that's almost the opposite of actually what I think we should be doing. So when you mention that, it just makes me reflect again that we're not, even there, I was guilty of not thinking about the organizational side.
So look, my point is, I'm not saying we're doing that all wrong. Let me just reiterate that.
Yeah, you still
what I'm
need
saying
those
is there is an observable gap. We don't seem to be addressing it head on, and so we need a different conversation. Okay, well, I'm about to talk about what I think is a solution or a beginning of a solution to that, but we need to have an honest conversation about what is the solution that's going to make a difference. And one of the things I think we should talk about is insights focus on growth in a business. And by growth, I essentially mean money and commercials.
Yes.
And I think that is at the heart of our challenge. And to get that right, we'll begin to solve for the gaps that we observe.
So let me just dig into that a little bit more. When you say growth, we're talking, going back to your client side roles, thinking about the way that, say, Carlsberg grows its business, adds more revenue, sells more product, essentially, I guess. Yes. But there's caveats as well. So one of the bad habits of businesses, for me, is essentially a misaligned or misunderstood idea of what growth are we going for? And we can have another podcast about the idea of growth. I mean, growth basically is the KPI for any business. And yet there's a juxtaposition, even coming from the city, because they want to see volume growth, they want to see increase in figures in year, but they also want assurances that the business is good for the long term. And so you have this juxtaposition of, immediately have this juxtaposition of KPIs. What are we trying to satisfy here? And then within the business, you have brand and marketing, by and large, focused on brand building, long-term brand building, which hopefully will deliver long-term growth. And then you have sales focused on short-term. And depending on the performance of a business, those two functions can find themselves either invested in or cut back. And one of the bad habits of business is not understanding, or is actually assigning short-term wins to sales and long-term wins to brand and marketing. And it doesn't need to be that way. But what you have is this pendulum swing. Why is this so important for insights to understand? Is because insights is sitting on the data that tells the business how it's performing, the dynamics of a category, the nature of its competitive behaviors, and can actually cut through and stop that pendulum swinging. And insights has that role to play because nobody's playing it at the moment. So just picking up on the point, your point there is almost that if we focus more on those things, the growth, and understanding what growth means for the business, and we look at the knowledge that we have within that, then what we're doing is focusing more on the long term by nature.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
We are focusing on giving the true picture of a market dynamics, our position within it, and most importantly, our competitive position within it. Because one of the other bad habits, if I may, is focusing on our own brands in a silo.
Yes.
How many times have you sat in front of a brand tracking presentation and they've shown you your funnel and you might see the conversion, but it's your funnel for your brand? We've all been there. You know,
very
for a
sometimes.
brand to win, not in all cases, but in most cases, for a brand to win, somebody else has to lose.
Yes.
So you should never look at a brand in a silo,
No.
because there's always a competitive context. Who are you going to take from? Where on the funnel are you going to take from them? And what does that mean for the actions you take? It becomes very, very specific.
Yes.
That's an understanding of growth opportunity
Yes.
that Insights absolutely owns and should be owning.
But insight in that function then has to, from what I'm hearing,
Yeah.
take themselves away from this laser sharp focus on the process potentially, and think more about the context of the market, the dynamics,
Or make
and
the
the context of the decision, or the context of what's happening
or
in the
make
business.
context part of the process.
Right, of course.
You
Yes,
know,
because
and-
if you bring
and-
because
and
that then
again-
allows us to still
Yeah.
love our process.
So let's go back to your original question. You know, one of the things that we don't talk about enough, you know, I mentioned there was a gap in the conferences and the discussions we have. If Insights was more focused on commercials, and I know, you know, we've talked about this, bless him, James Wycherley and the IMA, his new book, The Insight Leaders Playbook, and I will give it the plug. It is excellent because it builds on the first one, which was Transforming Insight, but it talks very specifically about prioritization focused around commercials. And if we actually action that and did that, I think we would solve for some of the problems like C-suite respect, understanding the importance of what we do, and then you get greater investment. And I'm not saying we get, you know, all our insight agendas are wrong. Those things absolutely have added meaning when they're linked to commercials. And that's why I think we can solve for the insight impact gap if we start talking the language of the C-suite and we start talking about growth, we start talking about commercials. Then our agenda becomes, I think we get much more freedom of our agenda to explore,
Well,
you know, the
strikes
weird
me that-
subjects, the odd subjects, the long-term subjects.
It almost strikes me that if you do that, if you're able to talk in that way, talk more about the context, more about the commercials, more about the growth opportunities, more about the competition, all those things, and bring that into the conversation as a continuous conversation, which I think is what you suggested.
Exactly that.
What we're doing is then stopping focusing solely. I mean, obviously the process of the brief to execution to result still matters,
Yes.
but we're almost raising our eyes to a longer term conversation.
Yeah.
Which is what I meant by longer term. You've got a longer term conversation, which is in context.
I still think you can have growth in short-term actions.
Yes.
If you get the
I mean,
right
the project is going to do that. Obviously, there's got to be a reason to do some research.
Sales can do that. But I think it's a better understanding of what are corrosive actions that kind of destroy or make growth vulnerable, or your ability to grow, or your momentum to grow vulnerable, versus truly constructive actions. And I think Insights has a role to direct the entire commercial business. We just need to insert ourselves in there. But look, one way I think about it to get us on the right path is there's three key roles Insight has. One is creating value. Two is what we call it gatekeeping, which sounds awful, but it's the in-year stuff. It's all the testing, you know, the ads, all that kind of thing that keep the business moving. And then the third one is accountability. So the trackers, the KPI support. When you think about the conversations we have, we're always talking about the brand trackers, the new way of testing, the panel that's going to get us to those answers quicker. We're always talking about the accountability and gatekeeping task. And we're also talking about how to make them more efficient and faster. And all the conversation becomes around speed and cost.
Yes, naturally.
And a little bit about the methodologies.
Yeah.
There's the number one task that we seem to underestimate or devalue or just not get involved with, which is creating value for the business.
Yes.
And that's where I go back to working, you know, we should balance that up. I'm not saying we put all our eggs in the basket, all the investment in the number one, but balance it up a bit better.
So if that is our number one task, creating value for the business, I come back to then how do we solve that? How do we begin to change the way and we've talked about the change in our conversation in there, but what I want to pick up on there is your point about putting the customer in those decisions in more places almost. Because again, it strikes me that that's what we have to do.
Yes.
C-suite matters, C-suite support matters, but how in those organizations you've been in, how would you now, looking back, reflecting back, help put customers in those decision points across the business on a more regular basis?
Yeah, so even though we're thinking about commercials, we are the one team that always has the consumer and the customer at our hearts and in mind. It's our first thing. What would they do? What would they think? How would they act? How would they react? So I think that gives us a special power that, again, nobody else has, because we look at it always through that lens. So when I am looking at the dynamics of the business, the dynamics of the category, our competitive position in that, we're always thinking about why are consumers buying more of them than buying less of us, or the other way around.
Yeah.
And so if we were just thinking more about the commercials, we're going to have the consumer wraparound all the time, because that's the why. So I don't think that comes very naturally to us. What doesn't come naturally is the core point, the numbers and where the growth is going to come from, and how we can get more of those consumers to do more of what we would like them to do.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's tapping into our heartland and our expertise and our passion, but just from a more commercial angle.
And do you think by having that more commercial angle, that naturally would engage stakeholders in that conversation and help the flow of dialogue?
It's got to, because ultimately the whole business is KPI'd against bottom line or top line or EBITDA.
Yeah.
So if we, Insights, is also predominantly thinking about bottom line, top line and EBITDA, then our choices are guided, because that's ultimately what we've got to be influencing.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds horrible. It means we're talking, no different game than the accountants or the CFO or whatever, but that's why we're here.
Yeah.
In a commercial function, in a client-side business at least.
Yes.
So, let's not be allergic to money. And I think that's one of the issues that perhaps we have been, because I don't see money mentioned. I don't see results. In conferences, I see we did this project, it had this impact, great. I rarely see hard and fast, money and results.
Yes.
And I'd like to see more of that.
Yes, we have to make an attempt.
Is that too brutal for us? I don't know, because we are such a lovely bunch and we're so collaborative.
I don't think it's
too
about
brutal.
I don't think it's about being brutal. I honestly think that's just difficult. It is difficult to do, right? But I think, again, we have such focus on process and to be right and to be correct that we almost don't lay claim to the money and the growth.
Yes,
because that isn't our value. Again, it's going back to the point of value.
But this is the key point, and I've said it before. But if we continually talk about only speed and cost, those are the metrics by which we will be judged.
Yes.
As a team.
Yes.
And when times are hard or you're not delivering savings or speed,
you're going to get...
If you're judged by those metrics, that's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
If you're equally judged by value. And there's a connection, direct or indirect, to bottom line and EBITDA, make yourself accountable for that. That's better place to be for me.
Yeah, it almost change that focus from the cost and efficiency side to the value side, and it becomes a natural part of our conversation.
So KPIs are a great place to start, right? If culture and KPIs drive behavior, and culture takes a lot longer to fix or change or adjust. But we have a job to play there as well. But KPIs is potentially another bad habit that needs fixing. Not selecting the right ones for us that stretch us. I've talked before about the failure of some great innovations has been down to misaligned KPIs. Example being, we've released this amazing new innovative product into the market, but the sales figures within 12 months haven't been great. So local team stops investing and it's binned. That's kind of crazy, but that's just a KPI, the wrong KPI set for the people who are most important in this. Yeah. And I think, Insights needs to have a look about our contextual KPIs with all the rest. I know this sounds boring and like business-like, and it's an anathema to all the lovely blue sky thinking of a new methodology and a deep understanding. I know it is, but the deep understanding is irrelevant unless it has meaning. And I'm afraid to say the meaning is down to the commercial success of that business.
It is. So one last question from me before we finish. What's the one thing that you think our listeners today should take away from today's episode?
I mean, there's so many things, but if there was one, I've talked about the change in attitude as well as actually doing. let's get into a mindset of leadership versus service. I think too many insights people, we're lovely, but we've been guilty of feeling or positioning ourselves as a service to stakeholders.
Yeah.
If you think about an insight leader versus a growth leader in a business, a growth leader is tasked and judged by an outcome. We are judged by a process predominantly, not completely, but predominantly. Yeah. Let's be judged by outcomes.
Yeah.
And let's be much, much clearer about what those outcomes absolutely are and really directly linked to business success.
Brilliant. Outcome, commercial success, value rather than process.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point to end on. So thank you very much for joining me today, Nick.
Thank you.
Good luck in your new business as well.
Thank you very much.
And thank you too, audience, for tuning in today's episode. We may be out of time today, but we will be back with another episode in next month with more inspiring stories about customer insight. I've been your host, Paul Hudson, and this has been MRX Lab.